Greetings and welcome to Cota Access. My name is Holly Rowland. I'm an operating partner for Cota Capital and the host of Cota Access. Cota Capital is a San Francisco-based investment firm focused on private and public modern enterprise technology companies. Cota invests financial and knowledge capital in both bold leaders at companies delivering on the promise and potential of their modern technologies. With more than $1 billion in assets under management, the firm has invested in more than 80 private and 30 public technology companies since its launch in 2015. For more information, visit cotacapital.com or follow us on LinkedIn. Cota Access brings together founders, thought leaders, and leading executives to explore a variety of business and technology trends and topics that fundamentally impact our society. Today, Eric Lee of Cota Capital will host a discussion with enterprise cloud industry movers and shakers about observability. Take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Holly, and a warm welcome to our audience and our panelists. I'm Eric. I'm a principal at Cota Capital, focusing on infrastructure software investments. In this discussion, we'll be focusing on the dynamic ecosystem of observability and data monitoring. I'm going to start by first briefly introducing what observability is. We understand this is not necessarily a household term that you casually use hanging out with friends, but if you do, you've certainly come to the right place. We'll then give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves and tell us more about their companies and some of the exciting products they're working on. We'll then launch into a discussion about the latest trends in the space. And for our audience, please don't be shy in submitting questions. We'd love to hear from you, and you guys often have the best questions. So what exactly is observability? In the world of software, observability helps cross-functional teams track the health of software environments and troubleshoot. It's effectively the how, to empower companies to understand what is slow or broken, as well as quickly decipher exactly what needs to be done to improve performance. Yet, despite all of the tools available, monitoring and diagnosing the health of your IT infrastructure, it's still incredibly difficult. So an analogy I'll use for observability is to imagine trying to fly a plane. You have a number of different flight instruments to tell you whether the plane is working properly and if you're on course. You'll have an altimeter to help measure altitude, an airspeed indicator for miles per hour or knots, and a fuel gauge. And this is among a myriad of other instruments. So with all these tools at disposal, hopefully you'll be able to land the plane safely. Now, observability is similar, but instead of providing a pilot with the health and measurements of their plane, observability companies are providing IT operators with the health of their infrastructure or software environments. And over the last several years, enterprises, they've rapidly adopted cloud-native infrastructure services such as AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. And so tracing an event to its origin in these distributed systems, it requires thousands of processes running on the cloud, on-premise, or even both. However, we have conventional monitoring techniques and tools. They struggle. They struggle to track the many communication pathways and interdependencies in these distributed architectures. So observability allows teams to monitor IT infrastructure more effectively, helps them define and connect effects in a complex chain, and trace them back to their cause. So our panelists today, they're going to help us take a closer look at observability, what it is, what it takes to implement, and the benefits your organization can gain from it. So we're extremely fortunate to have our exceptional panelists join us today. I'd first like to start with Brian Roux. He is the co-founder and CEO at Rollbar. Rollbar has created a powerful next-generation error monitoring, alerting, and analytics platform for developers. They work alongside a development team's existing tool chain. They give greater coverage and insights into broken code across the development lifecycle. And they work with some of the world's top organizations, which include Salesforce, Twilio, Affirm, Duolingo, and Twitch. Brian, please take a moment, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit more about Rollbar.
Sure thing. Thanks, Eric, and hey, everybody. Hey, I'm Brian, as Eric mentioned, co-founder and CEO at Rollbar. Quick background, I grew up in Seattle, learned to code as a kid. I kind of grew up just building things on my own, and learned a lot kind of through that, just about what are the fastest ways to go from idea to production to user. I started Rollbar a number of years ago to kind of take everything that I've learned and try to make it possible for developers to build software faster than they ever thought possible. So that means things like, what are barriers that are preventing you from releasing? Can you remove those barriers? Do you actually need to be afraid to deploy? Our mission with Rollbar is to help developers build software quickly and painlessly. We do that today with one product that helps them find and fix errors quickly. What that means is, as a developer, you don't have to be afraid about breaking something, because you know that you can fix it right away when it's broken, and the impact is going to be really, really small. So our customers use our product to automatically fix bugs, to automate their process about how they go from discovering to fixing, and we're excited to carry that mission forward. We're a team of about 65 based in San Francisco.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. Next, we have Laurent Gill. He is the co-founder and chief product officer at CAST.AI. CAST.AI, they're an AI-driven instant cloud optimization platform for Kubernetes applications. They can automatically reduce your AWS costs by 50%. And I'm sure a lot of ears perked up when they heard AWS and 50% cost reduction in the same sentence. So Laurent, could you please introduce yourself, describe CAST.AI in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So very nice to meet you guys. My name is Laurent. I'm actually French citizen. I'm living most of the time in Miami, in Florida. It's actually a pleasure to speak to you guys. The reason why we started the company is because we were frustrated so much with the amount of money we were spending on AWS. And I'll give you the story. So we started my previous company. We were spent, I don't know, $1,000 a month for 15 employees. And by the time we got acquired by Oracle, that became $2 million. And every end of month, we would receive these giant 150 pages bills from Amazon saying, yeah, that's why you spend that much, because you buy all these things. And then we always start thinking, well, what do we do about this? Like, why is this $2 million? And is it linear to how many customers we have? So we never were able to understand or reply to any of these questions. And I remember we would meet with all my other co-founders, and we would decide at the end of the month of a few things to do to have this under control. Regardless of what we would do, it would still increase by 10% the next month. So we said, never this, never more. There must be a way to automate that. There must be a way to have your infrastructure fully autonomous, so it self-organizes itself, so you know exactly why you spend that much. You also know that you will not spend more than you need, or you not spend less than what you need. So that became CAST.AI. We are able to automate your cost monitoring, cost optimization. And yes, if AWS or Google or Azure are listening, we make your customers very happy. Yes, they reduce their bill by 50 to 75%. We have one client that reduced its bill by 92%. It takes 2 clicks on the screen to do this because it's fully autonomous. But the key here is we make the customers happy. So every time we do this, we noted that the customer use a lot more of the cloud than they were before, just because they are confident that what they spend is what they should. So that's the reason why we did CAST.AI. Very happy to meet you guys.
That's excellent. Well, I was understated by 50%, 92%. That's quite impressive.
Yeah.
And last but certainly not least, we have Marc Zadelhoff. He is the CEO at Devo Technology. Devo, they're reinventing cloud-native logging and security analytics. I would argue that no amount of data is too large for this company to ingest and correlate. And they integrate with hundreds of other leading technology companies, such as CrowdStrike or MongoDB. So Marc, please take a moment to introduce yourself and Devo.
Eric, great to be here with you, Laurent and Brian. And yeah, it's fantastic to talk about the area of observability when it comes to cybersecurity, which is my specialty. I've been in the cyberspace for a long time, 24 years. And this is the 3rd time that I'm helping to lead a company in the area of what we kind of call security analytics, enterprise logging, as you also pointed out in your introduction, and that is the observability segment in cybersecurity. And I'm doing this for the third time, a glutton for punishment, and maybe somewhat pathetically, but I think it's because I have a passion for the fact that observability and visibility in cybersecurity is the key to solving that problem, right? You guys all know about the moats and castles, the firewalls and the antivirus, the different controls you can put in place for cybersecurity. But at the end of the day, none of them are foolproof, none of them are guaranteed, and you need visibility. And I think for the societal problem of cyber breach, of fraud, of insider threat, of the compliance issues that we face, what you need is that observability. And the problem with society and technology is that, and you pointed that out in your intro, Eric, is the amount of data that customers need to ingest now has gone up 5 to 10 times. And so we are dealing with customers where they are shifting to the cloud, they have pandemic, they have explosion of data, devices, endpoints, and they need to go from 1 or 2 terabytes, for example, of machine data or log data a day, up to 30, 50, 100 terabytes a day, petabytes of storage, 400 days of hot visibility into that data for cyber purposes, and they have nowhere to go. And so that's why Devo was founded, and that's what we do. And we have great, huge customers taking advantage of that cloud native platform.
Thanks, Marc. No, that's fascinating. And the increase in the exponential growth of data is certainly an issue that I think a lot of companies are having to deal with. So, with that, I think that's a great segue into, today we're going to be speaking about a number of different topics. The first of which we wanted to discuss was the demand environment and the growth of this market. I think one of the interesting aspects of this industry is the compounding effects of market growth. You first have a growing number of applications where some believe there'll be more cloud native applications developed in the next 3 years versus the last 40 years combined, which I find to be quite a statistic. And then secondly, you have the percentage of applications monitored expected to increase. And so I'd first like to open the discussion by asking, how has the pandemic impacted customer behavior in terms of observability demand from your perspective? What are the key pain points? Is this a transitory phenomenon or a long-term change? It'd be great to hear everyone's perspective on this. Maybe Laurent, let's start with you. And as many of your customers are in the process of adopting cloud native.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yes, I call this the COVID hangover. So what happened last year is a lot of our customers moved to the cloud very, very fast. For the reasons we know, right? Most of the time they don't have a lot of other choices, but doing this because they cannot control the things at home as we used to during this terrible year and a half or 2 years. The problem here is then they start to realize, oh, our bill was here and now it's here, and what happened? And what can we do about this? And that's exactly the problem of observability. Like you get your bill, doesn't tell you where your system is broken inside. You only see the external aspect, which is the amount of dollar you need to pay for it. The question has always been, what do you do about this? And that's where observability comes in. It's for a financial return in this case, but what do you do about this? And how do you control these things that you move so fast on the cloud to in the first place? And I'll give you an example of this. So a lot of our clients realize they use thousands of CPUs for Kubernetes application, and they think it's great because that's how the developer decided to do this. And then they start to look in their console and they see CPU utilization of less than 10%. And so that's the problem where observability is key, is it's not just the CPU that is only used for 10%, it's why, which process, how do you trace these to the microservice that you need? These are all the questions that a lot of our customers start to ask at the same time when they realize, oh my God, what did we do last year? So I see this as, for us in our case, as even us were surprised by how fast this issue of optimizing your infrastructure became during the COVID years.
And while they're hungover, they realize they may have also accelerated security risks, right? Because I think that's the other part during the pandemic, as Laurent, as you said, they moved everything to the cloud. They start seeing those expense issues, but they also start to realize that they're out of compliance with regulatory issues. They have moved everything, and hackers have more wicked ways that they don't have alerting on in terms of breaching the cloud instances or SaaS. So I think that's part of this as well. As the acceleration to cloud means all of a sudden you have to rethink your security posture, and at the same time, you can't just abandon the on-premise estate that you have. I mean, most companies don't go and flip fully, and so it sort of means you have two legs, one on the ship, one on the shore, and you have to secure on both sides and keep that observability. So that's what we're finding a lot is, a lot of our customers are extending their probes into their cloud and SaaS infrastructure while maintaining it on-prem, and clearly the higher growth is on the cloud workloads.
I think the bright side of all this is that this move to the cloud means customers get better applications, they're improved all the time, and developers have more influence and more power. So there's never been a better time to be a developer than now, where you can shift code from anywhere in the world to anyone else in the world in 1 second. That is amazing, and the world has never been like that before. So that is a huge shift that is going to continue to cause all these trends to keep going faster and faster.
No, that's interesting, Brian. I think I wanted to key in on that shifting of the code and being able to ship, I think, software at a faster rate. And so I wanted to pivot. We've been undergoing this transition in the way software has been developed. And so in this age of digital, we have software, and it's become the backbone for many new services. It's provided competitive differentiation, and it's forced a change in this traditional software method. And so, Brian, you have over 5,000 customers whose software development you're continuously tracing. Can you just provide the audience some context? How has the software development process changed? And then secondly, how has this change in the software deployment process and development process affected the need of customers to transition away from legacy observability tools?
Yeah, I mean, the overall change with the dev process is just the demands of customers to have their applications improve more often has led all the way down to this world where the software is more complex, it connects to more services, and it is iterated and changed all the time. The software of today is not just on its own. It's built on the myriad of open source libraries as well as a myriad of APIs. Your application is infinitely more complex now than what you would have built 10 years ago, and infinitely more than 20 years ago. So that requires a new idea into what does it mean for the software to be correct and to work. And of course, like working is like whether the code works is one of the core things that people want to do when they're observing their code. What that means from the way that we see the world is you can really only learn so much about correctness and about have you finished the code and does it work in tests. Testing is important. It's not and testing shouldn't go away entirely, but it does become less important and less useful when the things that can go wrong just can't be duplicated in a test environment. What that means is that the paradigm needs to shift to one where we're comfortable saying, hey, we're going to accept that some issues are going to appear in production, and we're going to be prepared to respond to those when they do.
Yeah, we see a trend like it's very similar to you, Brian, where even the function of DevOps has been difficult to fulfill. So one customer yesterday called me and he said, look, I love to reduce my costs on Kubernetes by optimizing. Thank you, this is great. But I actually I can't find the DevOps guys that will even monitor and observe my application in the first place. So I think we start to see, it's very interesting, where we start to see the second order of magnitude of changes behind it, which is automate the automation or automate the management, monitoring, and observation, having system with a feedback loop, so at least the human becomes the analyst instead of being the human becoming the worker. So we start to see this. And it's interesting because in the discussion with the customer, we were discussing how much our product costs, and doesn't matter anymore for him because he has to have it. He has to have something that self-optimizes itself. we can't find anybody to do it instead, right? That was the other thing I want to say is, it's not that, I don't like the word of using change for change. It's not that, we become smarter, therefore we use new techniques. Think of us as, we have developers and DevOps, they are in a new toy store, but the toy store is now much bigger. So you have many, many toys to choose from, compared to before, where you had your small little machine on-prem with very few, electricity and network things. And so now the toy store is so big, and you have so much choice that you need to automate the assembly of all these Lego cubes that you put together. And so you need people to put the Lego cubes together, and then you need some others to ensure that the structure makes sense. And I think that's what we start to see. I'm super happy and fortunate to be in this middle of this transition, for the better of all of us, right? We have so many things to play with, that this problem is very exciting to solve.
I mean, one thing I'll point out here is the thing that's I've noticed in our security customers is the software development environment has become completely fair game for security observability and visibility, right? So, we're seeing more and more requests from our customers to bring in SAP logs, to bring in logs related to their e-commerce environments, like the Akamai logs hitting a web environment for the use case of fraud. Or the other day, a client doing mostly firewall and security monitoring on firewalls and endpoints and all that, saying I need my Azure Kubernetes logs brought in because that sits under the application layer and is key to monitor also for security purposes. So I think that's where I see the footprint of the Security Operations Center using technology like ours, expanding into this software environment, because it's becoming the target of the hackers to go after that environment.
No, that's fascinating. And Laurent, I love the analogy with the toy store. And I have a 5-month-old daughter, and so I think instead of buying her Legos, I will get her Kubernetes applications and have her start coding immediately. I think that'll be more fulfilling than Legos. But I think it's interesting because you guys all sit in a very unique perspective and see different parts of the IT infrastructure ecosystem. And I'm curious from your perspective, just what are some of the most exciting trends you guys are seeing in the field of observability, and where are we headed?
I think one thing that I'm excited, I mean, there's a huge skill shortage in our space, right? And so I think that's spawning two trends, one related to the technology and one societal, right? I think the technology trend is, we're trying, myself and all the players that are trying to help the security operations centers are trying to automate and make things more automated and increase the productivity of the SOC analysts, exponentially. And so really trying to use AI and ML, we have to check our bingo boxes now. I've said those words on this webinar, right? Because it's all the rage. But I think you really can now use analytics in a way to make decision-making automated and autonomous. And that's really going to help that problem. I think the societal aspect that it's converging with is diversity and inclusion, not to take us in a completely different direction, but I think it's forcing all tech companies, and certainly in the cyberspace where, only 15, 20% of cyber employees are female, and where we don't see underrepresented groups as much in it, all of us to start to say, how do we, and we've been doing this not just since yesterday, this has been the last 5-6 years of how do we recruit and retain people from completely different backgrounds than normal, from different universities and different parts of geographies, to fill the gap. So you can automate it, but you have to in the end recruit from a more diverse talent pool. I think that's going to be hopefully really good for our society, given every headline we all read in our respective newspapers.
I really like your analogy, Marc. The one thing we see, I'm sure you have some similar view there, is the adoption of self-autonomous systems. So where observability or monitoring goes back inside the loop. And so you have systems that naturally converge into stable environment. We see this on our case in our industry of cost optimization, Kubernetes. And I think that's probably what will help us human handle the enormous amount of data that we start to capture. We want to capture all the data. We have no way to analyze it. So let's have the machine do that for us. But if the machine tells us something is wrong, that doesn't help us much to repair that thing that is wrong. So having that feedback loop with some self-healing capabilities to make these systems fully autonomous, whether it's security, it's making new, optimizing cost of financial return. I think it's going to be very exciting to see how that works. And it's not that, oh, we just woke up yesterday and thought about this. It's that we start to leave the problem of having that. And so we all look for what is the solution to handle it. And at the same time as the cloud came, AI and machine learning also came. And suddenly you had these two blocks that you could now combine together into this autonomous system. So I'm super excited to see this. I think all our industries are doing this now. And I think it's for the better of all of us.
Yeah, I think this whole trend is ultimately driven by, I think there's the problem of scale and then the opportunity or tool of AI and machine learning. Buzzword checked again, but it's becoming more and more, it has become more and more real. In our business, we use it in a very, very specific place, right? It's about how do we tell if two errors are the same or different? If you're a human, you can do it, no problem, right? You can do it once, you can do it 10 times, you can do it, maybe you can do it 100 times. Are you going to do it 1,000,000 times? You're not, right? So that level of scale kind of takes a problem, just changes the shape of the problem. It's kind of it's a phase shift in kind of the dynamics of whether it's security or cost optimization or errors or performance or whatever that it might be. As all these trends that we talked about have kind of come together, we have this huge problem. Unfortunately, we also have a tool that we can use to solve it. So all that kind of comes together, just as Marc and Laurent were saying, and this shift towards not just looking at the data, not just observing, but also responding, right? The automation that's in response to observability kind of feeds back in. And that's, I think, the key to the next phase, whatever that will be. But I think without it, we'd be stuck, right? We wouldn't be able to build more software or serve more customers or build new businesses. But with it, we're able to move forward.
No, that's fascinating. I think throughout that discussion, I heard a lot about autonomous AIOps, and just one of the things that we internally put together at Cota, it's part of our observability thematic over the past few years. We created this slide, and we're trying to ultimately decipher and understand, or better understand, where the industry is trying to move. And so, I think the way we think about it is, a decade ago, we were sort of at level 1 or level 2, and you had IT operators. They were manually going into their IT infrastructure. They were setting up all of the application traces and setting baselines for their infrastructures. Maybe right now, depending on who you ask, we're somewhere between level 3 or 4, but ultimately trying to move to level 5. And so I guess the way we try to think about it is, it's this idea of where Tesla, they're moving from level 1 manual driving to level 5, trying to achieve higher levels of automation, which is, I think, the ultimate goal. But it's interesting. It's always an area of, does the customer, the customers want it. There's a shortage of personnel in IT, but where are we in that cycle? And so, Marc, Devo, they were recently named a leader in the Forrester Wave for artificial intelligence for IT ops. That's quite an accomplishment. So congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
So, we'd love to maybe start with you, but because you guys all sit in different parts of the ecosystem, just what are some of the major hurdles of achieving fully autonomous environments, and where are we in this cycle, and what is the customer reception? What are the pitfalls we're seeing?
Yeah, I think in cybersecurity, it starts with being able to get a lot of data, right? It's hard to do all these types of things in small data sets. So you have to have large data sets to do some of these things. And then I do think that there is, I've been in the space for a while. I used to be at a very large company, and I would get questions from non-cyber people, can AI just solve cybersecurity? And I think there is so much marketing on it that it's like you show up at a customer and they're like, oh, there's AI in there, so you're going to catch him, right? And it's like, well, it's not quite so simple, right? So what we've tried to do is kind of do a workbench approach where you can bring, we have AI in the product, but we also allow people to bring AI algorithms that they're developing and testing on their data sets into the platform as a rule set, into like a Docker container in the environment. And so we use our professional services teams to, we have a couple of MIT trained data scientists that lead our data science teams, and they work with our customers to try and tune to those scenarios. Because one customer catching, a certain fraud scenario with Akamai data coming into our platform, leveraging AI, is going to be pretty different use case than a bank in Spain that is leveraging our technology and AI and our technology on credit card logs to detect fraud in credit card transactions, right? It's not like a magic AI thing that you can just drop in that solves those things out of the box. So I guess it's, walking them through that journey with our teams, having the flexibility in the platform with different types of AI algorithms to do that is how we're doing it.
And Laurent, just from your perspective, I mean, how are you guys thinking about it at CAST.AI?
From a data scientist standpoint, when we look at this, and yeah, AI is very hyped, and Marc, I appreciate, and Brian also, when you say that it means nothing and everything, or it means everything and nothing in that order. I like to use this concept more to explain this in the following way. We're trying to solve some problems that are non-linear. Non-linear means they have variables, but these variables depend on the next one to behave. And therefore, you cannot build a mathematical heuristic model that says this is the input and the output is deterministically, it's determinist based on the variables that goes into a model. It doesn't work this way, because one change on one variable will impact the others, and then suddenly your model is broken and it means nothing anymore. So this is where AI is very useful, and that's where we use it, where we say, look, it's very fuzzy. There is no one thing that explain the output in a one-to-one relationship. There are many things in input that may influence what the output looks like, and that's where these kind of models are useful. And they're useful in almost everything we do, and I'm sure my colleagues will say the same, just because the amount of information is so vast. I'll give you an example of this is, how do you know which information you should even use that describe or have enough variability to describe the problem you try to solve? That even us, we are not capable of thinking. So we have models that actually select the models that select the right input because they feel themselves that you have the most variability or the most impact or influence between the input and the output. So we use AI to decide which kind of data is important to describe the problem you try to solve. So this is why these techniques are very useful. Outside of the hype, it does work. As long as you do these things, you have enough information that cover the entire spectrum of what you try to solve. And in our case, we use AI to simplify or select this information that we need to get to the result. So it's not a hype anymore. It's, it will be interesting when we stop talking about it. This is when it's part of mainstream, and this is when it stopped being a thing. It's just part of it, and because it's part of the box, and therefore it's inside. We don't need to talk about it anymore. I think that's what will happen.
Like, no one asks you if your product works with the internet anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Or electricity. Oh, you need electricity. Yeah, you don't need to say that in your brochure.
Yeah,
it would be the same.
Part of this slide that kind of stands out to me is I would take issue with lumping all anomalies together. There are anomalies that are very simple and easy to identify. We don't need AI to define those. We don't need anything fancy to heal from them or to fix them. And there's an infinite scale towards problems that haven't been solved yet, right? Do we expect AI to solve our unsolved mathematical problems? Not yet. Probably not ever, right? So I think that, I think once we get into level 3, the 3, 4, and 5 can be really simple. They can come together. But I think that, another way to kind of cut this is what kinds of problems can these systems deal with? What kinds of problems can they identify? And within those, which ones can they heal? Which ones can they resolve? And then over time, how do we learn from the human input that's solving net new problems, such that when those similar problems are seen in the future, that human input is now replicated and scaled. I think that's kind of the way that I see how this is playing out in the code side, and I would imagine it might look similar for both in Marc and Laurent's companies as well.
No, that's fascinating. I think it's great to hear the differing viewpoints, just where we are in the cycle. Ultimately, where we're trying to head from this vector. And so, just to shift gears a little bit, because I did want to better understand, I think, we've heard this, I think, consistent theme in our discussion so far, that there is just an increased amount of data. And so, Marc, for example, you said your largest customer ingests potentially 50 terabytes of data per day. And so I'm wondering are there certain metrics for servers or log events generated by networking equipment or application traces or so forth and so on? I guess, what's the hardest item to monitor? And are there items that are becoming less or more important, and ultimately trying to, I guess, glean the signal from noise?
Certain log sources, just to be very practical, are much noisier than others. I've mentioned Akamai. I think the endpoint detection and response, so the endpoints like laptops and desktops are very noisy. So, it's maybe not a very exciting answer, but there are just certain sources where you have to apply more screening, more analytics to reduce the noise to value ratio. And so for sure, that's the case. I think what the fascinating thing as well is you get into the dilemma, the more data you have, the better conclusions you can make, the harder it is to do, right? So there is always that kind of relationship with the data. If you can bring in a disparate set of data, your identity data, your endpoint data, your network data, your e-commerce data, your application data, that's good because you can find trends across it. Because let's face it, often a user is going from the endpoint across the network into the application, into the data, on top of the Kubernetes infrastructure, et cetera. And so if you can collect it all, you can find patterns that you wouldn't otherwise, but then it makes it more difficult. So lots of clever techniques, not just ML, AI, but just good old-fashioned normalization and pattern recognition. That helps with those problems.
Yeah, we have a different angle. So in my opinion, for what we do, the hardest thing to monitor is the human. And the reason is you have to trust and you have to agree with what our system are showing. And a lot of time they just don't. So we told them, look, it's going to be autonomous. There's a feedback loop. Just click here and activate. And the guys say, wait a minute, I don't know what's going to do. I don't understand it. How do I trust that that will do the best thing I need for my goal? And it's very often the case. We speak to DevOps guys and we show them, hey, this is where you are today. This is where you could be in reducing your cost on the cloud in that example. And the guy said, no, I can do the same by hand. And for me, that's the biggest challenge, is that no, you can't, but you have to say that very politely and in a way that you understand, look at what it does for you. And do you want to click on that button to say yes? So we tend to have a system that has a lot more configuration options, because then the human or the analyst, they feel that they are still in control of how they want their system to behave. So we try to be the opposite of a black box, which is very hard because these automated engines are effectively designed to be autonomous, right? So we try to open the box. We give a lot of configurations, so the user can influence the way they want their infrastructure to behave according to certain things like scaling up, scaling down. When do you want to scale up? At night, but not during the day. But yes, you could also do it during the day, but I understand you don't want to. Therefore, we have a thing that says don't do it during the day, because then you feel more, you understand. It feels more human that you understand what that machine will do, and you can control your destiny by changing all these knobs in this machine. So for us, that's more the issue is not be too afraid of what this autonomous system will do, and that means giving up a lot of options too.
I think this problem of like, how do you gradually build up trust such that humans are willing to delegate the work to a machine it's an important one for anyone building a product in the space. I mean, it's a reasonable fear, right? Because at the end of the day, the person, or like, who's responsible for the bill for my cloud bill, or for whether my code works, or whether my infrastructure is secure. Like, if there's a breach, we're not going to blame the AI. We're going to blame the CISO, right? Or they're going to be the one that has to deal with it. So, if I'm a developer and I'm delegating the work of fixing a bug to a system, I've got to trust it's not going to make it worse, right? Like, I don't want things just like going in and changing my code. That sounds scary. So, from my perspective, like, there's both the job of how do I build that technology and make it reliable, but also how do I provide an on-ramp in a way that will make a developer be comfortable with trusting it's going to work, so that it can actually be used. And I think if there's some encouragement for product builders like me, it's that we don't need to solve the problem all the way, because even if we did, it wouldn't be trusted. It's actually better to solve it incrementally, because then we can build up that incremental trust.
No, that's fascinating. I mean, I think, with all technologies, there certainly is an element or a level of trust that needs to be incorporated into the product, into the service. And so it's fascinating that you bring that up. And I think when we think about the customer, you can have everything from a Fortune 1000, Fortune 500, all the way to a 1 to 10 person startup. And so I imagine observability, the tools and the services that you need, it's not necessarily a one size fits all, I would guess. So I'm curious from your perspective, how might, from your perspective, just the different needs of the customer.
I think for us, if you just have a different in size of the security operations teams at large customers, that can be hundreds of employees, and at smaller organizations, they can be half an FTE, and the other half is doing IT support, right? Rolling out laptops or whatever into phone systems. So as you go lower, we see more and more of our partners on the managed security services side taking the lead with our technology. So they'll front us and do all the work for those pretty low staffed organizations. So that's for me a big difference when you have the large teams at the big banks or big organizations versus SMB.
Yeah, we in our case, there is no such thing as a small client. Meaning, if you think about this, you are a SaaS business, you're a startup with 50 people, and we cut your cost by 70%. Or you are a 2,000 organization, we also cut your cost by 70%. It is 70%. It has the same impact in the bottom line, whether you are a small client or large client. We thought about this for a long time. We decided that we only have one product. Yeah, the level of support is different. Like Marc, I'm sure you are doing these kind of things too, or Brian. Yeah, of course, hotline, it costs money to us, you have to pay more for this. Then this is most likely a large customer that will pay for this. But the function of the product is the same. There is no two product. It costs the same, it behaves the same way. It has all the same knobs that you can turn on and off. And I think it's the same for, if you think of this from the security angle, is why would a small company not wanting to be secure as a big company would? Like, the security impact of a small company is as dramatic as it is for a large one. The cost impact for a small company is as big as for a large one.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Marc, go ahead.
No, I think you're right. I think and I know you're not disagreeing. I totally agree with that. I think 30% cost reduction that you guys can do at a big customer, a small customer is 30% or 50% either way. And I think what we see on the cyber side is you need to have lots of expertise in addition to the ability to detect, and that's where the partners come in. But I think it's great that yours can do that just out of the box, and that's hugely powerful.
In our world, our goal is helping. It's all about the needs of the developer. So the question would be, how does that job change as the company size changes? If you're a solo developer, you have one set of needs. If you're a small team, that gets more complex. Now it's not just yourself, you got to start communicating. And if you're a team of teams or teams of teams of teams, now you've got many more communication channels and just a far more complex development process. So that's kind of the main way that we see the needs change for our customers is as those teams grow, the needs of a developer in a 10,000 person company are very different than the job of a developer in a 1-person company.
No, that's interesting. I know Rollbar, you service over 100,000 developers, which is quite impressive. And sort of dovetailing on that, we are curious in the sense that you can have large companies or small startups try to build a lot of these tools in-house and try to build observability or build monitoring tools themselves. There are a lot of open source products on the market. You may have teams that may view themselves as highly technical and not want to buy a third-party product. I guess, what would you caution these customers against? And just curious as to what you've seen in the marketplace, some of the pitfalls, and ultimately the thoughts there.
I guess your cartoon points out, the bigger tool for the bigger fool kind of metaphor. So I totally agree with that. And although there are dogs and cats involved, but I think that a couple of things. One is it's not the tool. I agree, and it's in the cyberspace. It's a culture, philosophy of using that observed information that you now get and having a process around the detection and response once you have that information. And then I think also there's also the classic issue of just trying to do too much at once, right? So now that you have a tool, let's throw it at everything that you could possibly observe, and before you know it, it takes a long time to actually get something useful out of it. So kind of some focus on those use cases of most importance now that you have such an important tool, and a culture around that tool being part of your system of improvement.
Now, I think whether you would want to build your tool or not, I think that ship has sailed already. I don't think you can do it yourself. If you think you can, then we'll talk again in 6 months. It's just, we are focusing. Yeah, we're focusing on something narrow. Each of us have a very specific focus, but we have a lot of people thinking about this problem when they wake up in the morning and until they go to sleep at night. I think it's going to be very hard for an organization to think they can do it themselves. It's almost the same as, hey, do we build a data center or do we use the cloud? Well, that ship has sailed also for the most part, right? In some cases, you need to still have stuff at home, but 5 years ago, I remember these discussions. I think there's no discussion like this anymore. I think the same for observability.
Yeah, I think, maybe somewhat surprisingly, I think the trend I see is if anything, it's more that people will move from a homegrown minimal solution onto a full-blown solution as they grow, right? It isn't that you outgrow the commercial solution. It's actually you outgrow the homegrown solution. And you're like, oh, wait, like this is now taking me a whole person to build and a whole team to maintain. Let's just buy a product and have our developers work on our own product. So I think that trend, that's what we saw as Laurent mentioned with data centers. I think it's happening with observability, and that will happen with anything that's important, right? as you know, that's just how our economy works.
No, that's great. I mean, it is amazing with some of the public companies we speak to on a regular basis, just the amount of do-it-yourself tools still out in the marketplace. I think even some of these large organizations still somewhat surprising. And to your point, you know, I think the limitations of those models, of those architectures, it does, from a return on time standpoint, it oftentimes does not make sense. So it is fascinating to hear the perspectives of our panelists here. And so, you know, another narrative or piece of rhetoric that we hear in the marketplace is, if I think back to our plane analogy, where we have all of our different measurements and tools, and if we think of each one as a different vendor, you know, companies are starting to talk about a single pane of glass for all of their observability and IT infrastructure needs. And just to give the audience some context, so for example, a decade ago, or even sometimes even today, a company can have 30 plus, they could be using 30 plus different monitoring tools. I think the largest that I've heard was 200, which I thought was spectacular. I mean, 200 is quite a lot. So as the field tries to converge into this single pane of glass, is this a myth? Is this becoming reality? Maybe just help us understand where we are in terms of the standardization of these tools in people's environments.
Yeah, I think the ship has sailed for that one too. There was a lot of discussion whether do you want best of breed or do you want a platform? And our opinion, or my opinion on this is, it is better to cover the entire size of the problem, even though you may not cover each pieces of the problem with best of breed. You know that you cover the entire size of the problem. And for me, a platform always wins over a number of features, even though these features may be the best of breed in their very narrow category. So not all of us think this way. It's very controversial. It's very controversial because you speak of the passion of people and what they have learned, and they know how to do one thing very, very great, and then they tend to forget that they only focus on something that is so narrow that they forget the rest. So it's very controversial in the industry. I can't imagine in security how difficult that must be. But for me, the platform always wins over the feature, and it's because of completeness, not because of the performance of each of these features.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I think like this is a dynamic that is ever present. I think there's, I was just thinking back to, so my grandfather was into cars, and he had, I remember in all his vehicles, he would have, there'd be like the dashboard with like a speedometer, and they always have a few extra gauges that were just kind of like tacked in there, like next to the steering wheel. And you know, many of those gauges now in modern cars are just part of the dashboard, right? So like that's a cycle. Is we build the platform. It's you know, it's the like mainstream use case, and then like some best of breed vendors are like, you know what, actually this thing is pretty important too. And over time, if it is, it becomes part of that dashboard. And if it's not, it falls away. So I think that's a dynamic that you know, every software vendor has to think about. And the question is like, are you that platform, that dashboard, or are you becoming the old one, right? I think but just the point I would make there is like, as a buyer of software, it's a fallacy to think that you can get everything you need in one platform. You want to get most, but you're always going to have stuff that you just got to have that isn't in any given platform. So you got to make that decision with that in mind.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think the dream of every dream of a single pane of glass in cybersecurity tends to be really interrupted by the innovation of a hacker somewhere on the planet, right? And so I think that's kind of the issue you run into practically. And then if you start to say that same pane of glass can also do IT ops, it can also do, you know, cloud monitoring, can also do you know, it's hard. I think there's the more flexible the platform, the more you can get there. But I think it's a good goal to go towards. I think to me in cyber, it means you should be constantly evaluating your vendors and reducing your vendors based on the ones that innovate and keep up, and based on the ones that don't. If you're installing and forgetting cyber tech, then you're probably playing the game the wrong way. And so that to me is key. Always striving, but not naive into thinking that some luggard of a dashboard that you just have and it covers everything is going to be the one that's going to work for you for a long time if they're not keeping up.
And Marc, it's interesting you bring up, the hackers, disrupting this, the goal of a single pane of glass. And I think within the industry, what I find fascinating is that these lines between observability and security, they're ever more becoming coalesced, converged, blurring. You'll see public companies like a Datadog make acquisitions such as Screen or even Elastic in the endpoint space with Endgame. And so, from your perspective, how do you see the product landscape evolving? And you're effectively, at the heart, I would say, of this transition and of this lead.
Yeah, no, and I think that we do both the IT observability and the cyber observability. I would say, we do major on the cyber side, but a lot of customers use us on both sides, and I think that major is important. I think it's a commitment to the tougher side of it. If I'm honest, I mean they're both hard, but as I said, with hacker innovation, I think you have to have a commitment to the cyber side to be in the cyber side. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there is a blurring there. There's, we've been talking for years about the NOC and SOC converging. We've been talking about physical and digital security converging. I've been at this for a long time. It's kind of, it's the Gartners and the Forest of the World. Every 5 years, there's some report about either of those two things converging. I think the spin cycles were just so different of those three topics. Physical, logical security, the NOC and the SOC, that I'm not so sure they ever will fully converge.
We see a little bit of convergence from our side, but it's because we are looking at cost. When you look at optimizing cost, the next layer of this becomes performance, or the trade-off between them, and so then it starts to be blurry. Do you want performance? Do you want cost? Do you want both of them? Which one is more important? You can imagine a system that knows and understands how to play with these two things. And it's the same, I think, in some case for security. If you optimize, in our case, it's Kubernetes applications. You optimize containers from within the application itself. You look at how many machines they use. You look at how big these pods, these containers are. You could actually also look at, is there any vulnerability in these containers? It's part of the same thing. If you do one for cost and one for performance, you can actually add a feature for security, and boom, you get that. Or data management is another one. That doesn't mean that's something we may do or may not do, but you can kind of feel, it smells that once you have access to the data, then the function become the feature. And then so you add more features because you have the data for it. And cost, performance, data management, they all use the same set of information. So that's blurry. It's kind of the debate we had on platform versus best of breed. Yeah, someone who is doing only data management for Kubernetes may not win a deal if at the same time you add performance. It comes with it, right? Or security or optimization for cost, right? So it's not all the case. It's not always in all industry. Like Marc, you made a great case. We also had these debates. NOC and SOC. Do we have two? Do we have one? Is it the same people, different people? Right. So it's not very easy to solve it, but in the case in our industry, it's very blurry for sure.
Yeah, I think these lines are blurred because, as Laurent was just saying, the data is kind of the same, right? Like you kind of want the same data to know if your application is working versus if it's being attacked versus if it's performant versus if it's cost effective. These are all, it's logs. At the end of the day, like these things are all logs and metrics. So, as vendors specialize in security or errors or cost or performance or whatever, I think that there's going to be a lot of natural convergence and toe stepping, and hopefully that'll result in some great innovation for the market.
Well, that's great. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, and I know for me that just flew. And so I want to thank you, the panelists. I want to thank the audience for tuning in here. I certainly learned a lot. And we hope you did too. So everybody, we appreciate it. We appreciate the time. We appreciate the efforts. And for you guys, the panelists, keep building great products. We're excited to learn more, keep us informed, and we're happy to be a resource here as we can. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Holly, who will introduce our legal disclaimer.
Thank you so much for joining Cota Access. Please take a moment to read these important disclosures on the slide. We'll leave the slide up to allow you time to review.
Some good reading, Holly.
I like to read these every night as we fall asleep.
This is
And I
for
will
my
not
this is
comment.
for my 5-month-old. This is what I have to. This is what I should be reading to her.
There you go.
This is good.
Okay, that concludes our broadcast. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.